Everyone thought the old man's hands trembled because of age until the recruits dared him to shoot. They never expected the silence that followed, or the 5 perfect bullseyes. That would change everything. The challenge began on a blistering afternoon at Fort Lockridge, where dust drifted like restless ghosts and tempers ran hotter than the sun. The air tasted of sweat, metal, and pride, especially the pride of 3 young recruits who believed they already ruled the range. And in the middle of it all stood the man they mocked, Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Ward, retired, but not forgotten. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Elias had only come to the base to drop off supplies for a veterans fundraiser. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't carry himself like the legend he once was. He wore old boots, scuffed and faded, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked like any tired grandfather stopping by to hand over donated goods. But the recruits didn't see the quiet steel in him. They only saw an old man, and sometimes that's all it takes for trouble to find you. The first insult came from a recruit named Carson, broad-shouldered, loud, the kind who mistook confidence for competence. "You sure you're in the right place, Grandpa?" He laughed as his friends snickered behind him. Elias simply nodded toward the supply crate. "Just dropping this off." Carson wasn't satisfied. Some people aren't, especially when their own insecurities demand an audience. "Maybe you should drop off a pair of glasses too," Carson continued. "I bet you can't even see the targets from here." A murmur rolled through the crowd. A few soldiers drifted closer. Sensing the shift in the air, the range officer paused mid-step. Dust swirled around Elias' boots. As though waiting, Elias didn't flinch. "Careful what?" "You bet, son." That only fueled the recruits. They exchanged glances full of smug confidence, convinced they had found an easy victim to laugh at for the afternoon. One of them pointed at the farthest target, barely visible at the end of the lane. "Tell you what," Carson said, puffing out his chest, "hit the bullseye once from that distance, and we'll apologize. Miss, and you admit you're too old for this place." Elias stared at the distant mark. His jaw tightened, not from offense, but from memory. He had stood on ridgelines where the air was thin, and every shot meant someone lived or died. He had fired in deserts where the sandstorm raged so fiercely that he shot almost blind. He had made impossible shots because soldiers depending on him demanded nothing less. And yet here he was being challenged by children who had no idea what they were awakening. "Once," Elias repeated. "No, 5 times." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Even Carson hesitated, but pride pulled him forward. "Fine, 5. If you even hit the board, you'll watch," Elias said calmly, "and you'll learn something." A faint tremor passed through Carson's smirk. Cliffhangers often begin with breath held, shared, suspended. And in that moment, every breath on the firing range seemed to pause. Even the flags at the checkpoint hung still. Elias reached for the rifle resting on the table nearby. It wasn't his. It wasn't familiar. It wasn't tuned to his hand the way his old service weapon had been. But he lifted it with reverence and quiet respect, like greeting an old friend who had been waiting patiently. He checked the chamber, adjusted the stock, tested the balance. Around him, a half circle of soldiers formed. Some whispered. Some folded their arms skeptically. Some, especially the older vets, simply watched with a knowing spark in their eyes. Elias inhaled slowly, letting the dust-scented air settle in his chest. This wasn't just about shooting. This was about memory, about legacy, about the truth that skill doesn't fade just because hair turns gray. But as he lifted the rifle, something unexpected flickered in him. Doubt. His hands didn't shake often, but today, he felt the ghost of an old injury waking in his fingers, the one he had earned on his last deployment when a collapsed wall pinned him during an extraction. The medics told him his hand's strength would never fully return. What if they were right? For the first time in years, fear whispered through him, not fear of failing himself, but of affirming their mockery. He steadied his breath. He reminded himself of the soldiers he had trained, men and women who had grown into leaders. Because he taught them never to surrender to fear, he owed them this moment. He owed himself this truth. He aligned the first shot. The world narrowed to the target. Then he squeezed. The crack echoed. The crowd blinked. One bullseye. Carson swallowed hard. Elias racked the next round with measured patience, letting the tension pool in the space between heartbeats. Dust lifted in tiny spirals at his feet. A bird launched from the power pole as if startled by the certainty in his aim. The second shot hit dead center. The murmurs grew louder now, shifting from ridicule to awe. One recruit whispered, no way he's doing this." But Elias didn't hear them. He was back in the mountains overseas, kneeling behind a crumbling wall, keeping his squad alive. He was back on the night range, training rookies, steadying their nerves while hiding his own pain. Third shot. Bullseye. A surge of energy rippled through the watching soldiers. Even the range officer, usually stone-faced, let out a low whistle. Elias felt the strain now, his old injury burning along his wrist. Sweat gathered at his brow, but not from the heat. His breath grew heavier. His heart thudded, reminding him that time spared no one. Fourth shot. Bullseye. A wave of disbelief washed through the crowd. Some recruits stepped forward unconsciously, as though being drawn toward something historic. A couple of older vets stood straighter, pride blooming in their chests. But Carson looked pale. The fifth shot would decide everything. Not just the bet, not just the humiliation or respect, but whether Elias could still trust his own body to rise when challenged. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't on a training range. He was in a hospital bed, hearing doctors say he'd never shoot like he used to. He was at home, staring at his medals packed in a box because he didn't know what to do with the memories. He was watching his reflection age, wondering if the man in the mirror still carried anything worth pride. Then he heard a voice, soft, familiar, his late wife, Lena. "You're stronger than your doubts, Eli." He opened his eyes, lifted the rifle. Steadied. Fired. Silence consumed the range. No murmurs, no breath, no movement. Even the dust hung still in the air, suspended like the moment itself refused to fall. The spotter lowered the binoculars with trembling hands. Bullseye. The word rolled across the range like thunder. Gasps, cheers. A few soldiers actually ran toward the target board to see it with their own eyes. Recruits who had mocked him minutes earlier now stared in open awe. Carson stepped forward, shame flushing his cheeks. "I didn't know," he stammered. "Sir, you didn't ask." Elias replied gently. "And respect doesn't wait for proof. It's offered first." A heavy lesson, a quiet one, but it hit harder than any shot fired. Carson lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry, Master Gunnery, Sergeant Ward." Elias nodded. Apology accepted. But then something unexpected happened. Carson lifted his head again, humility softening his expression. "Would you teach us not shooting? I mean, how to carry ourselves like that?" A murmur of agreement spread through the young recruits. Their arrogance had cracked open, revealing something far more valuable, a desire to learn, to grow, to understand the discipline that shaped legends. Elias felt something warm rise in his chest. Purpose. He had spent so long wondering whether he still had anything to offer. Now he saw it clearly. "That," Elias said quietly, "I can do." Over the following weeks, a transformation swept through the base. Elias returned invited. Welcome. Dan trained the recruits not just in marksmanship, but in humility, restraint, and courage. The yard would fill with soldiers moving as one, their coordination sharp as wind-carved stone, their respect genuine. Neighbors from nearby housing would gather along the fence, watching the drills, whispering about the old veteran who brought discipline back to the young. Mothers passing by with strollers would pause to witness the unity unfolding. Even officers began stepping outside during breaks just to observe the session, where generations met halfway, and Carson, once the loudest, became the disciple most eager to learn. He never forgot the day he witnessed 5 perfect shots, and a lesson that reshaped him. In time, Elias found new joy in mentorship. The ache in his hand remained, but the ache in his heart eased. Teaching gave him purpose, the kind that doesn't fade with age. Because mastery isn't just about skill, it's about passing the torch. Because strength isn't measured by what you can do but by what you inspire in others. And somewhere on that dusty range, the echo of 5 perfect shots still lingers, carrying the truth that respect begins long before the trigger is ever pulled. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, subscribe and stay a while. I'm grateful to have you here.